For 15 years after Richard died, I wore his ring like it was the only thing keeping me from disappearing too. Last spring, at 90, I finally took it off, and what happened next is not what anyone warned me about. I'm 90 years old. My name is Katherine Louise. I used to believe that ring was love. Slowly, I learned it was something else. There are some things we keep wearing long after they stop belonging to us, and the hardest part isn't taking them off. It's admitting we already know. So I want to talk with you, not lecture, just talk, about the 3 questions I had to ask before I could let mine go. If you've ever held on to something longer than it served you, hit like, subscribe, and stay close. Let me tell you what nobody tells you about widowhood after 80. They warn you about the first year, the funeral, the cold side of the bed, the second toothbrush you keep throwing away and replacing without thinking. They tell you year 1 is the worst. And maybe for some women it is. But for me, year 1 wasn't when the ring got heavy. Year 7 was. Year 8. Year 10. Long after everyone stopped asking how I was doing. In the beginning, the ring was Richard. I'd touch it while watching the news, while waiting for the kettle, while signing checks I never used to sign alone. It was comfort. The way his hand on the small of my back used to be comfort. I wore it the way a soldier wears a uniform after the war is over, not because the war is still happening, but because she doesn't know who she is without it. Then something quiet started happening. I was washing dishes one evening around year 7, and the ring caught on the sponge. Just a tiny snag, but I stood there at the sink staring at my hand, and for the first time I thought, this ring is in the way. Not in the way of the dishes, in the way of something else. I didn't have a word for it yet. A year later, my new doctor was filling out a form. He didn't look up. He said, "And are you still married, Mrs. Louise?" Such a simple question. I opened my mouth to say no. Richard had been gone 8 years. And instead, I heard myself say yes, because of the ring. Because the ring had answered before I could. Then came the man at the library. Kind eyes, about my age. We talked twice about a Wendell Berry book. The third time he glanced down at my hand, saw the band, and gave me a small, polite smile that meant goodbye. I went home and sat in my kitchen with the lights off for an hour. I wasn't grieving Richard that night. I was grieving the conversation that wasn't going to happen tomorrow. That was when I understood. The ring had stopped being a memory. It had become a uniform, and I was wearing it for everyone except myself. Because I think a lot of us are walking around carrying something like this. It isn't always a ring. For some women, it's their husband's chair at the kitchen table that they still set silverware next to. For some, it's a phone number they can't bring themselves to delete. For some, it's a name they still sign on Christmas cards. Katherine and Richard, 15 years later, in the same loopy handwriting Richard used to tease me about. We tell ourselves it's love, and maybe at first it is. But somewhere along the way, the symbol stops carrying the person and starts carrying something else. It starts carrying our fear of being seen as someone who has moved on, our fear of being judged by our children, our neighbors, our church, our fear of admitting that 15 years is a long time to wait for a feeling that isn't coming back. I'm not saying the love isn't real. The love is the most real thing I have. I'm saying the ring stopped being where the love lived. The ring wasn't love anymore. The ring was a fence. And once you see the fence, you can't unsee it. If you've ever caught yourself wearing something that stopped fitting years ago, a ring, a chair, a signature, a story you tell about yourself, tell me in the comments what it is. Not for sympathy, for company. I read every one, and I think we need to know we're not alone in this. Now, let's talk about the first question I had to ask myself, because for a long time I was afraid to say it out loud. The question was simple. Am I keeping this ring out of love, or am I keeping it out of fear? I want to be honest with you. The first time that question crossed my mind, I pushed it away so fast it almost didn't land. Because how dare I? How dare I ask whether the love I had for Richard was real after 15 years of wearing his ring like a vow renewed every morning? It felt like a betrayal just to wonder. But I've learned something in 9 decades of being a woman. The questions we're most afraid to ask are usually the ones already answering themselves. Let me tell you about someone I knew. Her name was Eleanor. She was 84 when we met at the senior center, 20 years a widow. Eleanor still set 2 places at the dinner table every night. A plate for her, a plate for Walter. A glass of water on each side. When her daughter visited from Phoenix once a year, she'd ask gently, "Mom, why do you still do this?" And Eleanor would smile and say, "To honor your father, to keep him with me." That's what she told her daughter. That's what she told the church ladies. That's what she told herself for nearly 2 decades. But one Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor and I were sitting on her front porch drinking iced tea, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Katherine, if I stop setting that second place, I'll have to look at the empty chair. And if I look at the empty chair, I'll have to admit Walter isn't coming back. And if I admit that out loud, I don't know who I am without him." That was when I understood. Eleanor wasn't honoring Walter. Eleanor was hiding from a version of herself she hadn't met yet. The second plate wasn't a memorial. It was a door she was holding shut. And I went home that night and stared at my own hand. And I asked the question I had been avoiding for 15 years. Was I wearing this ring to honor Richard? Or was I wearing it because the woman underneath the ring was a stranger I hadn't introduced myself to yet? Here's what I want you to understand, and this is the part nobody tells widows. Love and fear can look exactly the same from the outside. They can wear the same ring, they can set the same second plate, they can sign the same name on the same Christmas card. The difference is invisible. The difference is what you feel when you imagine letting go. Love says, "I remember him everywhere I go," and that remembering is light. Fear says, "If I let go, I will fall, and there will be no one to catch me." One of these is a gift. The other is a cage. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, can't it be both? And yes, it can be both. That's exactly what makes this so hard. The ring on my finger had been both for years. Love braided into fear so tightly I couldn't tell them apart. But I've learned that you don't have to separate them perfectly. You just have to be brave enough to admit they're both there. To stop pretending it's all love. To stop pretending you wouldn't feel relief if the ring were gone alongside the grief. So I want to ask you the same thing I had to ask myself. And I want you to be honest, because nobody else has to hear your answer. The thing you're still holding on to, is it love that's keeping you there? Or is it fear wearing love's clothes? Take your time. The answer doesn't have to come tonight. But please finally ask the question. Love doesn't need a costume. Fear does. Now let's talk about the second question. And I'll tell you straight, this one was harder, because the first question only asked me what was inside me. The second question asked me to look at what I had not done, and that is a much heavier mirror. The question was this: is this ring still helping me live, or is it quietly keeping me from living? Let me sit with that for a moment. Not the version of it that sounds dramatic, the quiet version. Because the things that keep us from living after 80 rarely arrive as tragedy. They arrive as the small no's, the invitations not accepted, the classes not signed up for, the cup of tea not shared. Let me show you what I mean. About 3 years ago, a group of widows in my neighborhood started a Friday supper club. Just 5 women, simple cooking, candles, sometimes a glass of wine. Mary called me personally. She said, "Katherine, please come. We'd love to have you." And I said, no. I told her I had a headache. I didn't have a headache. I had a ring, and I was afraid that walking into a room full of women without husbands would mean I had finally joined a club I had spent 15 years pretending I wasn't a member of. There's more. The senior center down the road runs ballroom dance lessons on Wednesdays. I had wanted to take those lessons for 3 years. 3 years. I would stand at the window watching the cars pull in. I would imagine the music, the lights, the laughter. And I never went. Because what would people think? A married-looking woman learning to dance alone? The ring was answering questions before they were ever asked. And then there was the man at the library, the one I mentioned in the beginning. I never even let myself learn his name. I didn't let myself find out if he liked the same poets, if he had grandchildren, if he had ever lost someone too. Because the ring had already decided he was someone I wasn't allowed to know. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. Her name was Dorothy. Dorothy's husband Philip passed when she was 68. After Philip died, Dorothy started wearing his old gray cardigan every single day. Inside the house, outside the house, to the grocery store, to church. For 15 years, Dorothy wore that cardigan. It became part of her body. When Dorothy passed last winter, her daughter went through the closet to sort her things. She found that cardigan folded carefully on the chair beside Dorothy's bed. The elbows were worn through to nothing. The cuffs were unraveling. A button was missing. But here's what struck me when her daughter told me the story. Dorothy never repaired it, not once in 15 years, not a stitch. And when her daughter asked the seamstress at church why, the seamstress said something I have not been able to forget. She said, because if Dorothy mended it, she would have to admit it was hers now, not his. Dorothy spent the last 15 years of her life slowly disappearing inside her husband's cardigan. And the worst part is that nobody noticed because she looked like she was honoring him. That's when it hit me. I was halfway down Dorothy's road. I just had a smaller, shinier symbol on my hand instead of around my shoulders. Here is the truth I want you to take with you. A symbol that costs you more than it gives you stopped being a memory long ago. It became a weight. Love was never supposed to be a weight. Love was supposed to make the rest of your life lighter. So let me ask you gently, what have you stopped doing because of something you're still carrying? The class you didn't take, the friend you didn't call back, the trip you didn't book, the supper club you said no to. Tell me below. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And I think you need to know you're not either. A symbol that takes more than it gives is no longer a memory. It's a weight. Now let's talk about the question that finally broke the lock. The first question asked what was inside me. The second question asked what I had stopped doing because of the ring. But the third question was the one that did what neither of the others could do. The third question asked what Richard himself would want. The question was this: if Richard could see me right now, would he want me wearing this ring? Or would he want me wearing my life? I want to tell you something about Richard because I think it matters. Richard was the kind of man who pushed me into the world, not the kind who tried to keep me in his pocket. When the kids were small and I was exhausted, he would shoo me out of the kitchen on Sunday mornings and say, "Katherine, go. Take a walk. Don't wait for the laundry. Don't wait for me to feel better. Don't wait for the weather. Just go." He said it for 51 years. Go. Live. Don't wait. And then he was in the hospital the last week. He couldn't really speak anymore. But on a Wednesday afternoon, he gathered everything he had left and looked right at me. He said 3 words. He said, "Don't shrink, Kathy. Don't shrink." I held on to those words like they were a life raft for the first few years. And then somewhere along the way, I stopped hearing them. I started wearing the ring instead. And the ring told a different story. The ring said, stay loyal, stay still, stay the woman he left behind. And I told myself that was the same thing as honoring him. But it wasn't. It was the exact opposite. Because here is what I finally had to admit, sitting at my kitchen table one morning. Wearing the ring to stay loyal to Richard was a betrayal of the only thing Richard ever asked me to do. He didn't ask me to wear the ring. He asked me not to shrink. And I had been shrinking quietly for years. Let me tell you about someone I know. His name is Frank. He's 87, and his wife Helen passed 9 years ago. For 9 years, Frank kept Helen's toothbrush in the cup beside the bathroom sink. He didn't talk about it. His son Daniel knew. His grandkids knew. But nobody said anything because Frank looked so peaceful in his routine. Then last spring, Daniel finally said something. He didn't say, "Take it down." He just asked, "Dad, would Mom want this?" And Frank told me he sat in the bathroom for almost an hour. And then he said out loud to nobody, "No, she'd want me to be okay. I've been using her death as an excuse not to be okay for 9 years." Frank threw the toothbrush away that afternoon. Not because he loved Helen any less, because he finally loved her enough to stop punishing himself with her. And I realized something looking at Frank. The people we loved most, really loved, they didn't leave us symbols to wear like collars. They left us permission. They spent their lives asking us to be more, not less, to go out, to dance, to take the class, to trust the kindness of the man at the library, to say yes to the supper club. The symbols are real, and the love is real. But somewhere along the way, we started treating the symbols like instructions when they were actually invitations to keep living. So I want you to do something for me before this video is over. I want you to picture the person you've been wearing a symbol for. Picture them really clearly, the way they looked when they were most themselves. Now ask them quietly in the chamber of your own heart. What would you want me wearing right now? The ring or my life? I think you already know the answer. I think you've known it for a long time. The hardest part is letting yourself hear it. They didn't leave us symbols. They left us permission. So let me tell you about the morning it finally happened, last spring, a Tuesday in April, around 7. The kind of morning where the light comes in sideways through the kitchen window, and the only sound is the kettle starting to think about boiling. I sat down at the table. I didn't make a ceremony of it. I didn't cry. I just slid the ring off my finger, and to my surprise, it came easy. 15 years of weight, and it slipped off like it had been waiting. I put it in the wooden box where Richard kept his cufflinks. Not the trash, the box, because the ring still mattered. It just didn't belong on my hand anymore. And here is what nobody warned me about. I didn't feel free the way they tell you you'll feel. I felt visible. For the first time in 15 years, my hand looked like my hand again. Not a widow's hand, not Richard's wife's hand, mine. 2 weeks later, I signed up for the dance lessons. A month after that, the man from the library and I had tea. Not a date, a friendship that was finally allowed to exist. Letting go of a symbol isn't forgetting the person. It's refusing to be buried with them. If you're still wearing something, a ring, a cardigan, a chair at the table, a name on a card, I'm not telling you to take it off. I'm asking you to look at it. Ask the 3 questions and trust whatever answer comes. If this reached somewhere quiet in you, hit like, subscribe so we can sit together again, and tell me in the comments, what's your ring? I'll be reading.